Hi, folks. This is Keith.
This is Andy. Welcome to Brockton Bay.
And we're back for another episode of the Brockton Bay Chronicles, reviewing Worm by Wildbow. Today, Andy and I will discuss proper preparedness in the face of the ongoing Endbringer threat. Andy, I have several important questions to ask you before we get started. First of all, what's up for review today? Second, are you prepared for the Endbringers? And third, do you promise to abide by PRT evacuation rules?
Well, we'll be reviewing Arc 8, Extermination, chapters 1 through 5. As far as my preparedness for the Endbringers, before I read this, I was definitely not prepared. Repeat, not prepared. So I appreciate the fan art that you shared. But even with that, still very stunned, still reeling from the literary blow from Wildbow. As far as abide by PRT evacuation rules, I would also have to say no to that. As you know, I'm an avid bicyclist. I would probably have multiple escape routes, bike routes, and an electric bike ready to be able to get the heck away from the bay. Anywhere away from water. Kind of that scene from one of those impact movies back in the 90s comes to mind, where it's just get to higher ground, keep going.
So get inland no matter what.
Exactly. Yeah. You all can try to go underground where water tends to go when it's off of the surface, but I'm going to go high and inland. So.
I hear you, buddy. I hear you. And that given the situation in this arc, that I can definitely see that. And on to new business.
We got a great comment from Code Zeta, and we're both going to chime in on that. And we do have some additional comments we'll respond to in our overview episode, which will be coming up a few episodes from now.
Right. And Code Zeta's comment was rather lengthy. It dealt with kind of the sidetrack you and I went on about why Empire 88 didn't take over Brockton Bay. You want to chime in on that first?
Sure. I'll read a little bit of the comment from Code Zeta. Kaiser is well employed, successful both economically and professionally. So his biggest motivator, and thus the group's motivation, ends up majorly being driving the neo-Nazi agenda further, taking territory to sell drugs, minorities, that sort of thing. I think that is spot on, and I didn't really factor that in when we were talking about this, but not everybody has the same drive. Coyle, it seems, is focused on ambition, but that kind of comes at the cost of him needing to be behind the scenes. And Kaiser is about his ideology, and those kind of ideologies need someone who is kind of a face of the philosophy, if you will. And Kaiser definitely seems to fit more that mold.
And on to another section of Code Zeta's comment. He says, this is merely speculation, but I think a lot of these guys fell due to circumstances into Kaiser's opportunistic, monetarily resourceful hands as they triggered. And this, I think, pausing his comment briefly, this has to do with the amount of people who ended up as henchmen for the Empire 88 and why they fell in with Kaiser. And Code Zeta continues, and they were given an offer too good to refuse, ending up within the umbrella of neo-Nazi and supporting an agenda, being indoctrinated into it as they went. Yeah, I can see that being the case. If you've got somebody who was primarily maybe just a thug or whatever kind of a criminal, and they triggered, and they may have, it's possible that Kaiser sought them out for their ability, brought them into the fold with promises of cash and just the opportunity to hurt people. And as they got to be further and further, deeper and deeper into the Empire 88 sphere, some of them drank the Kool-Aid, and maybe more were just putting up a facade just for the opportunity to commit crimes. But I can see that as how they fell into his orbit.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's definitely one of those things where the money and the opportunity to be part of a group, have the protection in numbers, could be kind of a gateway drug. Kaiser, being the master manipulator, is able to then slowly feed in the party line and get people on board with that.
Now, with that out of the way, thanks to Code Zeta for his contribution. And as Andy said, we do have a few other comments that we will save for our overview episode a couple of episodes out from now. So as it stands right now, I think it's time for us to hit our point by point. What do you say, Andy?
I say let's go to the field and check in on our soon to be less numerous capes.
Sounds good. This episode begins Arc 8, Chapter 1. We find Tattletale and Skitter making their way through the onslaught of people trying to evacuate to the various shelters around Brockton Bay. And it's as you would expect it to be in a disaster situation, whether it be natural or, in this case, Endbringer induced disaster. Folks are like mad animals fearful mad animals trying to get to safety. And Skitter is watching the carnage as they go.
Yeah, this it's interesting the way this is phrased. It seems like this isn't just in a panic situation. How often have we all received directions to do something? Some of us take the time to go through it and understand, but then inevitably there are plenty of people who just read part of it or misread it or didn't read it at all, and they end up making a situation that much worse. Don't get me started. I don't want to go into an old man rant here about how communication and reading have been lost in our culture. It's understandable, but you would think that with the stuff that had just gone on with Purity, that people would be on edge and would have already had, the go bag or whatever, and kind of be ready to go, or might have even left town already if they could, But, people are going to be people. Yeah, they're going to panic.
And one of the things that comes up, we find out in this world that the Endbringers have been appearing for a while. Indeed, at one point, Skitter talks about the evacuation drills that the city holds every 5 or 6 years, and sometimes how people don't or choose not to necessarily take advantage or participate in those drills. So the Endbringers in this situation seem to loom like a shadow, wouldn't you say?
I hadn't really considered it that way, but yeah, I agree. Kind of reminds me of the old movies we would see in class of the nuclear war drills, what to do if it happened, where the fallout shelters were, that kind of thing. So it's almost like people know that the Endbringer bombs could go off at any
Yes.
time, so to speak. So different places like Brockton Bay, which is a very likely target since these are coming from the ocean, they need to be on alert or at least have a plan in case something bad happens.
Skitter and Tattletale are making their way to where the capes are gathering in preparation to face the Endbringer, Leviathan. They're making their way over to a building where Armsmaster and some of the biggest capes in the world, the most famous capes in the world, not just in the country, are arriving. And this is thanks to Armsmaster and Dragon's advanced early warning system. This has allowed them to prepare somewhat, even if on short notice. And we get a statement a little bit further in the chapter, from possibly in chapter 2, where Legend talks about how it's thanks to their efforts that the teams aren't just arriving on scene and then having to dive immediately into the fight. So In this instance, props to Arms Master and Dragon for their coordination and getting this alarm sounded early enough that they can prepare.
Yeah, I'll have more to say about this later. Yeah, it must have been pretty jaw-dropping to see all these folks showing up and to be kind of included in their number, and just to realize the gravity of the situation. It's one thing to read about these things in the paper or whatever online, but totally another thing to see. All right, yeah, it's not just the National Guard, but the Army, Navy, Air Force are all here. SAC NORAD's up on the screen over there. They're ready. So, it's all hands on deck, and that must be pretty intimidating for Taylor and the rest of the Undersiders.
As they arrive at the building, and Taylor is taking inventory as to what capes have come, we see Empire 88, the Travelers, various teams, various good guy cape teams from around the country, and Skitter looks for the others of the Undersiders in the crowd. She tries to find Bitch and the dogs. Tattletale spots Gru and Regent, and she heads on over to see them. And Skitter seems to be a little bit surprised by the cold shoulder that the boys turned her way, to which I'm kind of asking myself, what did you expect? You guys, this is just several hours after their big fallout at Coyle's place, and the feelings are still pretty raw.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it both ways. As you said, it's a really recent event, but the Undersiders had each other's backs, had gone through some pretty nasty stuff together and supported one another. And, it's kind of like all the other folks are at least tolerating each other and are in the same room. I mean, you've got kind of the worst of the worst in Empire 88, and then you've got the top of the Protectorate there as well. And they're all just saying, all right, put everything aside for now and let's go for it. And then these people that she hung out with aren't able to put aside that, she had a moral dilemma, and they kind of give her the cold shoulder. So I don't know. I could see it either way.
I like this section that Wildbow wrote, and Skitter's thinking this to herself as she spots Gru and Regent. The two boys glanced my way, then turned their attention to Tattletale, ignoring me. That really stung. It was sort of inane that I was concerned over something like that, given the seriousness of the present situation. We were here because we faced the very real possibility of facing down one of the Endbringers. I shouldn't be worried about broken friendships. But she is, and she's a teenager, and as you said, you can understand it from both sides. I think that it's good that Wildbow set that there. We're going into battle, and for this team, this one particular team anyway, there's some bad feelings between the two sets, the two sides.
Yeah, I kind of think of some of the end of the Marvel arc where, he had the Civil War and the two sides squaring off. But then when stuff got real, they were like, all right, let's put that aside. We got somebody who wants to take out half of everything. So that's a bigger deal. But as you said, these are teenagers, and it just happened. There were a lot of time passed between the events in Civil War and Infinity War and Endgame and stuff. So that helps people to see things in a better perspective.
Before we move on into Legend's big speech, as Skitter's going and noting the various capes that were there, did anybody catch your attention? Was there any groups or anyone that you thought worth commenting on?
Well, I thought it was pretty cool that the way people were teleporting in and whole groups were coming in at once. I could vividly picture that. And then, they mentioned this one one person that she wasn't sure who it was, kind of had a metal sheen to him. He really got described a lot.
Oh, the metal skinned boy.
Yeah. He clapped her on the shoulder and as he walked by.
That I don't think that's a spoiler. That was Weld.
Oh, that was Weld. Okay. He was just mentioned in the previous interlude. Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and share that because, yeah, he had already been mentioned. So it shouldn't be any kind of a spoiler or anything.
The Bambina character was kind of interesting, but they didn't say a lot about that one. I did like the rogue Parian, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I'm going to go with Parian. I've heard it pronounced a couple of different ways. I think Parian is, we'll go with that.
Okay. That would be a tough way to go, I guess, would to be, I'm not going to be a cape. I'm not going to be a villain. I'm just going to make money off of my powers and just kind of go on my own.
So you think that just in a world of capes, you think being a rogue might be the most difficult way to go? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I think, people tend to want to join a group and there are definitely benefits. There can also be consequences. As we were just talking about Empire 88, you can think you're getting into it just for some reasons, and it ends up there's all these other ulterior motives. But going it on your own, I don't know. I would see that as being kind of the equivalent of being a street musician versus joining a touring band. You get to do your own thing. Sure, you get to set your own hours, but at the end of the day, if nobody comes by your street corner, then you're just a guy playing a horn by yourself.
kind of lonely.
Kind of lonely, exactly.
So Legend, who is the top dog in the Protectorate, Legend gives a pre-battle speech. And one of the things that Legend emphasizes, first of all, he thanks everybody for being there. And as we're moving into chapter 2, he thanks everybody for being there. And he comments that 1 in 4 of the capes there will not survive the fight. And the purpose of him stating that was to let everybody know just what they were in for. Wasn't pulling any punches. And also to emphasize the people, do not underestimate Leviathan. He's no dumb brute. And then he goes into discussing or describing the other members, the other Endbringers, Behemoth and the Sea Morgan, and talking about how the 3 of them arrive and what they were as far as how they each were dangerous in their own unique ways.
Wow. 1 in 4. I can't imagine watching a movie and seeing all my favorite capes or heroes or whatever and just thinking that by the end of the movie 25% of these people are going to be dead and they're not going to show up in any more movies after this. Yeah, that was a big shock. I guess I should have grasped that with a name like Endbringer. There's probably a few people are going to get ended, but it still was stunning to read that. And even with the preparation, they're still not very confident. So that's, I was on pins and needles going into the next chapter.
One of the themes that runs through this story is the theme of escalation. And you can see it here. The story started with this teenage girl fighting a guy and nearly dying, or at least being in grave danger, to where now she's in a major battle as part of a contingent of capes and being told flat out people are going to die. So the danger level has significantly escalated.
Oh my gosh, yes. And it's hard to know how that's going to happen. I mean, we've seen the way Purity was just wiping out stuff in the previous arc. And you would think with her not even be the stoutest person around, with everything arrayed against it, that they would be in pretty good shape. But yeah, if 1 in 4 is going to die, this is going to be a knockdown drag out.
As Legend is giving his briefing, and actually, the situation, I think back to probably the 1 or 2 situations that this brings to memory for me. It was probably the first time at a coach's clinic that I saw Frank Cush give a speech, and that was kind of, at the time, when Cush was still at issue and he was the man,
right.
and I'm just a entry level Pop Warner coach, so Taylor's awe I could definitely relate to in that regard. But anyway, Legend goes over their strategy, and this is all as they're watching the approaching storm. There's a dark, threatening storm off the horizon, and it's moving slowly toward Brockton Bay. And they're talking about their strategies and what capes are going to fight where. And they talk about the fact that Brockton Bay is what they're calling a soft target. It turns out Brockton Bay sits on top of an aquifer, and that Leviathan, being a water manipulator, he's going to pull out all the stops and will use whatever water in whatever capacity he can manipulate. And then he talks about how Newfoundland was wiped off the map by Leviathan. What you think of that little nugget?
The level of destruction and death that's being contemplated here is really hard to imagine. It's one of those exponential jumps that sometimes happens in a story that you maybe could have kind of seen coming. The idea that 1 in 4 capes will not survive the fight. At the rate capes seem to be triggering, if there wasn't some kind of winnowing of the herd, if you will, everybody in your next door neighbor is going to be a cape, right? Or a super villain. And it's just going to be kind of like the Wild West. You can't hardly leave your driveway without somebody, lifting your car and flipping it over or whatever. So there's got to be some balance to that, right? It's just kind of logical. But then to think that it's going to be something as cataclysmic as this, where Newfoundland is just gone, and that isn't the only time these kind of attacks have happened. It's like thinking of Fukushima happening, every other year or whatever.
Right.
It's just, yeah, it's kind of mind blowing. So it's just shock upon shock right now. As I keep reading through the story, it's just, all right, now what's next? Is the moon going to crash into the earth, or
right?
Worse? How could it be worse?
There's this one section of the chapter that I wanted to get your opinion on. This is Legend giving his speeches toward the end, and he's talking to the capes, and he's praising them for showing up. And he says, "You are doing a good thing, the greatest thing. This is why we are tolerated, why society allows and accounts for the capes that walk the streets and fight in its towns, because we are needed for situations like this." I don't think we've actually addressed why do people put up with capes crashing in their towns and knocking down buildings.
We haven't really touched on that at all, and it is a good question. But the flip side of it is, what choice do people have? It seems like there are so many of these folks around, and a lot of them can fly or disappear or manipulate you to the point that you decide you don't want them to leave. So they are tolerated. I guess, some of the stories that have been out there, like we were just talking about Civil War, the governments can step in and say, all right, you guys need to abide by this code and that kind of thing. And there's been a little bit of that. But I don't know. I think I looked at this speech as more of a, hey, we're all in this together. Use your powers to protect humanity, whether you're want to rob them tomorrow or, save them from a burning building, whichever one you want to do, they have to be here for you to do that. So let's try to save everybody.
So as they're winding down the briefing, Arms Master has some communication bands handed out to the various assembled capes. The various wards go up and down the rows, people there, and are handing out these communication armbands, and Arms Master describes how to use them and what each button on them is for. And the storm begins to intensify, and the rain is coming down hard, and eventually a tidal wave hits the building, and the heroes they try to shore up the roof from collapsing under the weight of the water. And Legend calls for their teleporter to get them out of the building. He teleports them out to the middle of the street. And in the downpour and the salt water, and Behemoth is there and comes into the middle of them and begins to slaughter people.
One thing I'd like to touch on before we get to that is the way they tried to kind of designate different parahumans by what powers they had. And Skitter felt left out, basically, because she didn't fit any of the categories. So, I could see myself at that point saying, well, why am I here risking my life if I'm not a flyer, I'm not a teleporter, I can't do force fields, I don't have superhuman strength, I'm not a long-range attacker.
Yeah.
Should I take a selfie with me and the Leviathan? Hey!
Oh, God. Yeah, if you got a waterproof camera, maybe if your iPhone can handle it. But again, is that vintage Taylor, so to speak? I think I pointed that out. I forget what the other circumstance was, but is that vintage Taylor? She had said in the last arc, when she and Lisa were discussing the Undersiders' response, and Lisa had pointed out, hey, before you joined the squad, we had all said that if this ever arose, we'd go try to help. And even though she's not a member of the squad, Taylor said she would not be able to forgive herself if she couldn't try to help. So isn't this vintage Taylor?
That's a great point. And I think that is kind of what sets Taylor apart. I remember a time in college when I was involved in a situation in class where things were divvied up kind of this way, and I got to the end of the list and I didn't fit any of the categories, and I got up and left. I felt kind of excluded. I didn't feel like I fit in, and I was not comfortable kind of divulging that, I guess, in front of people in the class. Whereas I think Taylor would have maybe stood up and said, hey, I must be unique. I didn't fit into any of these categories, so I'm a new category. Or not really thought, maybe I'm part of every category or something. It's just, I think you hit on something there, that this is vintage Taylor.
I want to point out the guys who were doing the audiobook for this.
Oh, yeah.
So as we're getting toward the end of this chapter, and that last line where after they've teleported outside and Leviathan rushes up from the shoreline into the midst of the heroes and begins slaughtering everybody, and the armband starts chiming off and reciting all the names of the people who are down or deceased. To their credit, the guys doing the audiobook, they fade out, and it's rather chilling. So as you're going through Krieg down CD5, WCM deceased CD5, and it just kind of goes through that list of name and fades out, and it's very chilling. So mega props to those guys for that little nugget that they did during their recording.
Nice.
we move on to the bonus interlude, Lisa. And this is kind of not a full origin story, but we get to meet Lisa and her time right before she joins the Undersiders. What were your thoughts on this?
Well, in general, I've really enjoyed the interludes. They've provided some neat insights and shown a different side of things than kind of the main storyline. This one, though, was like being on the tumble dry setting. It just kind of bounced all over the place. And even though I didn't have the benefit of the audio you just described, I got this feeling of, just impending doom. And I was ready for, all right, how are they going to get out of this? What's going to happen next? And then there's a girl in a shop who's suspected of probably being a shoplifter. And I'm like, okay, wait. And then it bounces between that and then other parts of Tattletale and kind of what's going on with her. And it was just, I had
a little jarring. So you weren't I don't want to put words in your mouth. You weren't necessarily enamored of the format.
Well, like I said, I think of the interlude as, because I don't drink, I can't use the term aperitif, but like an after dinner mint or a sorbet or something. It's a nice little change of pace, something to enjoy, something to savor a little bit. And this was like thinking you were eating one thing, but it tasted totally different. And then it had a bunch of like walnut shells in it or something. And you kept biting on stuff like, ow, what was that? So this jarring is a good word. I love getting the information, but it wasn't nearly the kind of relaxing interlude I'd come to expect.
I see. We meet Tattletale. She's in a store and they're suspecting that she might be shoplifting, and she's got bigger plans. She's actually going to try to rip off a guy, get his wallet. And we get insights into her power. And this interlude bounces back and forth between this scene in her memory and to the present moment where she's first with Regent and Gru, and they're discussing options for attacking Leviathan. And the story goes back and forth and advances a little bit. Tattletale gets accosted by three people, and the young girl Lisa gets accosted by three people who turn out to be Coyle's individuals, members of his army. And in the present, we see Tattletale and Gru discussing what if one of us die during this attack, and then Tattletale requests to go up on a building and for a better vantage point, and they send a flyer to grab her. So the story, it moves back and forth, and you have to kind of pay attention to what's going on at each given time so you're not missing anything.
Right. It does kind of go from one end of the spectrum to the other, and that makes it a little bit more, I think that adds to the jarring impression I got from it. One comment that really hit me, though, was when Tattletale was looking at Skitter and seeing how she was kind of oblivious to the fact she had a piece of paper stuck to her, and
right.
She was just really focused on trying to, assess the situation. And she thought to herself, Tattletale did, she'd be better at using my power than I am. That was a really insightful commentary, I think. We have seen Skitter do a great job thinking on her feet and being super good tactically, but also being able to think ahead of stuff. Or, they mentioned any number of times one person will say one thing one time and Skitter will kind of take it to heart and change her behavior or change her approach. I thought it was interesting that Tattletale picked that moment to think of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's also a tendency for us to underestimate how effective we are. It's one thing to be on the inside and kind of be your own worst critic,
Mm-hmm.
And it's another thing to be on the outside or think of someone else, but until they're really been in your shoes, you can't say. So it's interesting that Tattletale kind of has this little bit of lack of confidence, I guess, but I think she's pretty good at using her power. I think she's shown that time and again too. So
what do you think? What did you think of Tattletale? She seemed a little hard on herself for not anticipating what would happen with this reveal of Coyle's kidnap and drugging of Dinah Alcott. She seemed kind of hard on herself about this and in that situation, about this whole thing where Skitter would be the most likely to bail if something unpleasant like that was revealed, and she should have seen it coming.
Yeah, I mean, I can see her feeling regret. Anytime we have a broken friendship, we tend to search for reasons why it happened, and what part we might have played. So I can see where Tattletale's coming from with that. But I think there are plenty of mitigating circumstances. One being that, I mean, Tattletale calls it growing lax, but just, friendship can be a very comforting thing. And feeling like you're making that connection, you sometimes lose sight of other things. Secondly, kind of like what we were talking about with Kaiser and Empire 88, once you kind of blur the lines a little bit, it becomes easy to kind of start forgetting that those lines were there in the first place. And, you can lead down that path where you keep blurring the lines and then stuff doesn't really have the impact that it once would. Not to excuse Tattletale, but that is kind of a common pattern. So I get where she thinks she should have seen it coming, but I don't think she just dropped the ball necessarily. I think she's just a human being and kind of had reached a level of familiarity with a lot of things and didn't realize that wasn't the case for everybody, especially Skitter.
Hey, I want to jump back to the previous chapter briefly. When Armsmaster went over to Tattletale and the rest of the team and asked where Hellhound was, this was when they were talking about when they were divvying up assignments for the various capes and he had mentioned, Legend had mentioned those who could create expendable minions essentially, and Armsmaster asked Tattletale, "Hey, where's bitch?" And Tattletale's like, "She's not here, and you better be glad that she's not here because your implication is that you think her dogs are expendable, and you need to be glad she's not here because she'd probably set them on you."
Huh. Yeah, I had forgotten about that part. That was an interesting little interlude or interaction, and I would have liked to see where it went, but then Armsmaster got kind of called out by Legend as he continued to set up the groups and everything. So we don't get to see where that would have gone. Bitch definitely has a very pack-oriented relationship with her dogs that is probably hard for other people to understand fully. So you could see where other people would think of maybe just like you would have guard dogs at an installation of some type. Yeah, they're trained, they're very important to you. You might even become friendly with them, but in the end, they're there to give you that warning, and it would be sad if they were taken out, but that's part of their possible job duties. So I could see where Armsmaster was coming from, but it's nice to see Tattletale stood up for Brutus and the rest of the pack.
As we're working our way through this interlude, we get various moments where Tattletale's power in the present, we get various moments where Tattletale's power feeds her information, as in this one section. Leviathan, non-standard cardiac, nervous system, irregular biology, no standard organs or weak points, no brain, heart, or center of operations for the rest of the body. And in this paragraph, it just kind of, it's neat to see how her power feeds her this information. And concise little nuggets. And she has to, upon occasion, pull back and not go down rabbit holes and say, and a couple of times she mentally hears Gru in her head saying, no, information we can use. And it brings her back to the focus on the task at hand, something that they can use to affect Leviathan. I liked that.
That was a neat way that Wildbow described the power. I envisioned kind of someone clicking on links on various internet pages or search results and just, oh, okay, what was this? What was this? Oh, and kind of like in Wikipedia where all the different terms are defined, and then you can click on that and, oh, well, what happened at that event? I'll click and go see that. And eventually you got to dial it back in and say, oh, what was I trying to research in the first place? I could picture her mentally following, a web of yarn knotted together and, going at different intersections to a different strain of yarn. But it was interesting that Leviathan never was human.
You caught that, huh?
Yeah, that was very bizarre because there's always been this implication that even Gregor started out as a person and then got powers that turned him into something that was hardly recognizable at times, and there are others that are even more so. But
you think there's definitely more to that, or you just kind of, things that make you go,
I was thinking that too. I hadn't really thought about it a lot. I mean, it really jumped out at me when I read it, but now in the context of talking about how Bitch creates the dogs, you wonder if this is maybe somebody was triggered and, their powers went awry and they made something like the Frankenstein's monster, something they couldn't control.
I see.
But I don't know. It's I hadn't really followed that train of thought.
Okay. Well, let's see if anything comes of that. So both timelines, if you will, come toward an end in this interlude. One with Tattletale in the present being washed off the top of a building that Leviathan has jumped upon, and his after image is sweeping people off to over the side. And the past timeline ends with her on a phone call with Coyle, with him trying to buy her services. And you want to put any final thoughts on either of those?
Well, they didn't come out and say that Tattletale was dead, but it's sure looking like she died. There was a brief dizzy moment when she realized she couldn't tell which way was up. She realized she was falling. Anybody who's done any kind of surfing or, even been in the ocean very much, you get in that situation where you get in the whirlpool, you get a Maytag tumble, and you don't know which way is up. You don't know how long you're going to be under. And, that's just a fractional taste of what must be going on in this. So, and Tattletale doesn't have any powers that are going to help her.
Right.
She can't summon anybody. She can't do anything. She doesn't have any power to jump out, to freeze anything, to stop time, whatever.
She has no invulnerabilities or anything like that. She's not tough in any kind of way. She's just a regular fragile human in the face of this thing.
Yeah. So I was kind of a little grief struck right here. I thought, oh, well, that sucks. That's the end of Tattletale. So I'm hoping I'm wrong because they didn't say it's Wildbow didn't state it specifically. But, if 25% of these folks are dying, plus all the other crap that's going on with buildings falling and as we go on, the aquifer and sinkholes and that kind of thing, it'd be easy for one casualty to be missed. So
we move into chapter 3, and I like how the Tattletale interlude, we get the battle from her point of view and she's observing Skitter, and then we move into chapter 3 and then we see things from Skitter's point of view again, and you can kind of mentally merge those two images together. And Skitter has decided to put her emergency rescue training, medical training to good use, and announces to the armband, "Hey, point me to people I can help out. I've got limited first aid training." Yada yada yada. And the armband starts directing her to heroes that she can help. And in the meantime, capes are falling, Leviathan is raging, and blood is being shed.
This would be an amazing scene in a movie. I almost get the idea of, Skitter on the ground trying to figure out what to do, and then kind of, you see a building in the distance, and then zooming in to see Tattletale, and then see the building collapse, and it's zooming back to Skitter working her armband, and just laser beams everywhere, water everywhere.
An extremely cinematic bit of writing here.
Exactly. Yeah, this is definitely something that I would love to see on the big screen. And it was one of those things where you're kind of like, no, go back to that one. I want to see what that cape was doing. But it's just kind of like this is going to sound really stupid probably, but it's kind of like the old Tasmanian devil from the Warner Brothers movies, where it's just bouncing everywhere, and just death and destruction is following it. And there's these brief flashes of, oh, well, maybe that's getting the better of it right there, but nope, it's loose again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, nice try. Anyway, so as Skitter's going around playing EMT and doing what she can to help people, and she actually at one point she chastises herself for not having medical supplies, to which I'm thinking, I mean, you just came from a meeting with Coyle. How did you know you were going to need medical supplies in your utility kit? I mean, give yourself a break for a minute there, Skitter. Come on.
Yeah, this reminds me of Tattletale's self-recrimination as well. There's just that if you're introspective at all, then when you come up against something and you don't have what you need, or things didn't work out the way you thought they would, then that clicks on that critic, and you replay it and you're like, oh, well, if I had said this, or, oh, if I had thought to do that. So again, this is, as you said, vintage Skitter or Taylor, but not necessarily the good part of vintage Taylor.
Right. Yeah. That old part that she sometimes, well, she does hold on to, where she is unnecessarily hard on herself for no reason at all. I mean, how did you know you were going to need this stuff? I mean, come on,
right.
Give yourself a break. We get from her vantage point, we get a view of Alexandria coming in to take on Leviathan. And I like this description here, where it says, it was Alexandria who speared forward to confront Leviathan. He saw her coming, ceased his onslaught to rear back, and then lunge ahead to meet her. When they were only 15 feet apart, he stopped, let his water echo rush forward to meet her. And then it goes on to describe how she counteracts that, swinging her arms to break the oncoming rush of his water echo, which that was a pretty neat weapon to give this extremely large and fast moving creature. I thought this water echo thing was a good add-on for him.
I've never seen anything like that described in any of the books I've read or any of the movies or TV shows I've watched. It was super effective the way he used it, Leviathan, that is. And if anything, I could imagine it have been in any of the fight scenes you see in these movies. It tends to be a little isolated, and you see what's going on in the local area. But this really allowed me to picture that there was crap falling in a 50-mile radius.
Yeah.
Every time Leviathan turned around, something was getting flung over somewhere with the water. And it was like there were 50 Leviathans running around or something. It was kind of amazing to think about.
And Skitter is doing her best amidst all this chaos and combat to try to help people. And the names continue to be listed by the wristbands of the fallen. Some are down, some are deceased. it's nothing but a whole bunch of death and destruction. And then Leviathan calls a tidal wave on shore. And poor Skitter, she's in the middle of trying to perform CPR on this one large cape who had fallen. And Shielder, who is nearby, he calls for people to come to him, and he puts up she has to abandon this poor guy. I mean, it's a teenage girl having to abandon this guy she's trying to help. She's sorrowful about that. He puts up a shield bubble around himself and about 15 other capes. One of them dies barely, it's too late to get underneath his protective shielding. And then the tidal wave comes on and wipes out more capes. Legend warned them. This is what Leviathan does.
Well, and I thought it was interesting that, it's one of those things where the tide of battle kind of goes back and forth, and Skitter thinks to herself, we're winning.
Yeah, nah.
And then, then that's the tidal wave. And it's kind of like, oh, yeah, we forgot about that power. That's not good. Luckily, she gets there, but it's just amazing. You get to see the Leviathan in its element then once the water gets there and it really starts moving around.
Yeah. And we get a look at Mirrodin and Eidolon working in combination immediately after this wave comes on shore. And for a brief period of time, Shielder's group, they're submerged. And Mirrodin, using his wooden staff, evaporates the water and forms it into a ball and shoots it over and hits Leviathan with it. And at one point, having seen that, Skitter comments, okay, I could almost buy the wizard angle seeing that. So that, up until that point, I guess he's got kind of a Gandalf look about him. Not exactly, but it sounds like it.
I agree. Yeah. And it brings out a good point, and one that I kind of wondered. Wildbow touches on it coming up here in the next couple of chapters. But if Leviathan is such a water-based creature, I don't understand why they didn't try to levitate him out of the water. And, maybe Mirrodin isn't powerful enough to get Leviathan off the ground and out of the water. But it seems like that would have cut down on Leviathan's effectiveness quite a bit.
Or it could be something under the Manton effect. I'm not saying it is. I'm speculating.
It could be. I mean, it's hard to. So they listed just a couple of the big catastrophes that had happened. And there are obviously a lot of these attacks from the different Endbringers. And so they've had lots of chances to come up with strategies and stuff. So you would think that they would know, oh, if we can get them off the ground, then that gives us a much better chance. They would have just used that. So it may have, tried and failed. As we're going to see here in a little bit, Armismaster has studied a lot of tape, as they say. And so he's come up with stuff. I wouldn't be the first person to think of levitation, and probably just didn't work before.
We get a tragic look at poor Miss Vista. They've kind of got Leviathan cornered between force fields and being up against a building that Vista is using her power against and deforming it slightly. And Bastion is up on top of that building, and the idea was to collapse the building on top of Leviathan, and he's yelling at them to do it. And poor Vista, she makes the building collapse, and that's it for Bastion. And the poor thing, I mean, how old is she? Like 12 or 13, and she starts weeping in the arms of one of the other wards, which is understandable.
Definitely. Yeah.
That was a very powerful scene.
Yeah. And I kind of missed that, because it was just, there were so many scenes flashing back and forth. I kind of skipped ahead to a couple lines down where he says, or Skitter's thinking Leviathan had more than halved our ranks with the wave. So it's like, wait a minute, we're talking 25%, and now you're thinking 50% of this group. So obviously they're not all dead, but a big chunk of them are. And then she notices this strange wreckage and realizes it's PHQ that's just kind of washed up on shore there and been tossed around, smashed to ruins. So all that stuff kind of caught my attention, and I overlooked the Vista having to contribute to the death of this other hero.
Yeah, he sacrificed himself in order to try to help the team gain a vantage point, if not just to slow down Leviathan for a brief moment.
Right.
And the names continue to come. And at one point, they, as to your point, they get a slight advantage, and Leviathan drops to try to run. Yeah, that leads us on to a little bit further down in the chapter where Miss Militia is firing. Miss Militia is firing, using a bazooka to fire grenades at Leviathan. Dragon has her kick butt suit, and she's using it to fire missiles and plasma at Leviathan's face. And Narwhal was throwing shields at him, and some attacks were more effective than others. They dig into his flesh, they'd cut him, but nothing was really, really injuring him to the point where he would just fall and stop the attack.
Hold on, I got to jump back here. I just noticed that there were two sections where the armband was speaking and saying losses are as follows. And in the second group, the armband mentions Tattletale.
Right. That one point where it says losses are as follows. Losses are as follows. And then it lists off a whole bunch of people.
Right. And then there's the second line that, as Skitter's thinking of Covenor ears, and it says Tattletale. So, wow. Okay. That confirms my worst fears, although it doesn't really say, were all those people dead? Was Tattletale dead? So anyway, sorry, I didn't catch that through the read earlier.
No problem. Yeah, I'm looking at that right now, and Skitter says, I couldn't afford to dwell on what might have happened to Tattletale. Yeah, there we go. It says, I could hope it was the latter regarding the question of was she dead or not. And jump back just a little bit further, and it says, Skitter's thinking to herself, no, what I suddenly really wanted to know was what the armband meant by losses. Were all those people dead? Was Tattletale dead? Why wasn't the armband directing me to help someone? And so there's still a little ambiguity there.
It seems like it, but it's not looking good.
Definitely not looking good. And the attacks continue. One thing she observes, that Leviathan doesn't make any noise, and she half expects him to hiss or roar in victory as he's slaughtering these poor people. Fortunately, Clock Blocker makes a play. Leviathan is rolling through the capes, and she's with one group, and Clock Blocker freezes him. Unfortunately for Clock Blocker, he's half immersed in the water that is under his effect that has stopped Leviathan. Skitter has the presence of mind to use the armband to call for someone to come get him out before he suffocates. Yeah,
got to give it to Clock Blocker. That was a great play, and really made a great impact on this part of the battle. But yeah, people seem to forget that he might have been stuck in there. But yeah, Skitter's able to get him some help and get him out of there. And then this guy shows up, and he starts acting all weird. And I didn't get it first. I had to reread this section a couple times.
Who?
Trickster.
Oh, okay.
I apologize for desecrating your body, brave hero. You do good work even in death. And Skitter's thinking, was he mentally cracked?
Right.
Was he serious, or was he playing around? But then you finally get that he has to have one thing to transfer places with the other thing, and they have to be roughly the same size. So
right, because he's not just I'll see you and teleport you from point A to point B. He's swapping
exactly
roughly the same mass from item A for item B.
Yeah. Didn't get that the first time I read it, had to go back and reread it. I'm like, oh, okay. That's what's happening there.
Again, rarely is there a power in this story that is straightforward. There's almost always some kind of wrinkle that prevents them for, as you had talked about, someone from being Superman. Even Alexandria, when she went toe to toe and picked up Leviathan and slammed him to the ground, he was able to grab her and pin her underwater, and she almost drowned.
Right. That's a great point. Now, again, I don't know why Alexandria wouldn't. I guess maybe she wasn't strong enough to just hold him up and, have everybody else join in while he was off the ground and out of the water. But sorry to keep harping on that.
No, stay on it.
But yeah, there are all these limitations. We see that with the force field folks, that they can put up something, but it's not totally impervious or can't stand up to everything. The teleporters have limitations. The flyers have limitations, as we'll see coming up here in a little bit. So that's good. I was kind of hoping, I can't remember which cape it was that, well, Long I know had this, but there was a cape too that just kept getting stronger. And they were thinking he'd be the head of Protectorate not that far down the road.
Dauntless.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dauntless died.
Oh, well.
He was one of the ones that was listed as deceased.
Okay. Well, so much for that.
We don't get the circumstances. We just know that he and some of the others who we may have heard of before are deceased. And matter of fact, the knight was deceased. And I kept thinking to myself, now, she wouldn't have been a front line. I mean, yeah, she can turn monsters, but that's when nobody's looking. Why was she? I don't see why she would be on the front lines, or maybe she just got caught in the initial attack from Leviathan and she died.
That could be. And I think somebody else, or I don't know if we've come to it yet, but they point out that there are people who obviously haven't gone up against something like Leviathan. I mean, who has, but there were lots of folks that were kind of underestimating things and thinking, oh, well, my attack will work. And then it's, Leviathan swats him like a fly. And it's like, I guess not. So it may have been something like that.
Yeah, we get to, I think that's a little bit further where we get one newbie cape who clearly hadn't fought an Inbringer, and Trickster had to say she put Flechette in danger, and Trickster had to swap the two of them out. Before we get to that, now at the moment, the Leviathan's trapped in the clock blocker's time stasis, and it gives them gives the capes a chance to reform their plans and reform their battle lines. And Arms Master says, hey, we're going to have to move on to plan B. We just kind of, we can't defend the way we were plan A. And this is what we're going to have to do. Here are your new assignments. Head over to your new locations. Skitter gets her orders and starts heading toward her spot on the grid. And this moves us into chapter 4, I believe. And when she gets there, she's begins to put on her battlefield commander hat and begins to try to map out what the best place for her to be and how best to use her bugs.
It's interesting seeing the different groups work together to try to come up with the plan while Leviathan is frozen in time. All the armaments that are arrayed against him and people getting ready to jump if something happens. But it's pretty chilling that there's that line. There were a little more than 50 of us left.
Yeah.
So Legend was talking out of the side of his neck.
He kind of grossly underestimated the number of casualties. Is that what you're trying to say, bro?
Either that, or, and we'll see that a little bit later too, maybe Leviathan is more cunning or intelligent than he was given credit for. I can't think of an analogy, but it's like, well, if there's just a little bit of defense there, I'll cause a bunch of destruction, and then when people show up, we'll fight and I'll leave. But since y'all showed up, I'm going to focus on taking y'all out. And because it seems like, as opposed to like a beast running rampant, there's a lot of directed assaults, where it could have been like, oh, well, Leviathan will just go storm through this part of town, instead turned and went after capes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that they have this strategy. Of course, you try a strategy and you don't know if it's going to work, and then you try to learn from it if you survive. But yeah, way more than 25% seem to have deceased or disabled already.
Yes. At one point, Skitter and the group that she's in, this is after Leviathan comes out of his, or was this before Clock Blocker's attack, where she ended up getting hit by a wave and got her arm broken initially? I forget where that was in the story. So Skitter's hampered by the fact that her arm is broken, and she heads off to her assigned grid while Leviathan is still in stasis. And Armsmaster and the other capes continue to try to lock him in and set up strategies for dealing with him once he comes to normal time. And she sets up the several swarm clones and decides to hide under an
carport.
Yeah, was it a carport? Okay.
Yep.
So she decides, after looking at her options, she decides to chill, to hang out over there. And then the Leviathan comes out of stasis and the carnage resumes, and we get more names coming, being listed on the armband of being either down or deceased. And then Leviathan shows up on her street, and he's duking it out with Armsmaster. Tell me what your thoughts were on this entire scenario, Armsmaster's play from the time they got there to Leviathan using the storm sewers to take him out.
Well, first, when Leviathan comes into view, it seems like there's been significant damage done with the plan. As it says, his one shoulder was bloated 5 times the normal size. He was injured in other places, had a hole through the side of his stomach, a larger blackened wound at the base of his neck, 1/5 of his face was missing. So it seems like they put some good things in place before the clock blocking wound down, but it still wasn't enough. And, we have the benefit of Tattletale's insight that there are no standard biological components. So it's kind of like shooting at a mobile rock, that you could take giant chunks of it off, but it's still going to be able to move. It's still a rock. There's no vital organ that you can take out. But as far as the battle with Armsmaster, man, I get where he's coming from. I think he's thinking to himself, if I can pull this off, then I'm not going to be second in command in Chicago. I'm going to be top dog overall. But dude, put aside your ego. You got a chance to end this. Just end it. You're having success. Just wail on the guy, wail on Leviathan and take him out. But he's a victim of his own hubris at this point.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's probably the only way to put it. I mean, it's very disappointing for a hero to be like that. But good on Wildbow for making him that guy. Yes, Leviathan, I'm going to be the one to take your head. And, everybody else, they were cannon fodder. I don't want to say that, but this is my killing blow and I'm going to get credit. And Leviathan's, no. I got other options. And then that description of how he raised the sewer pipes out from beneath the streets, almost like a whale breaching the water, and then that threw off Arms Master entire game plan, because he was all bragging on himself about having a supercomputer on his back to map out the surroundings and how he studied all the game film and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And Leviathan, I don't care. He grabbed his disintegration end of his halberd and like, yes, so. And then he got his arm ripped off for his hubris.
Great way to describe it.
And Legend told him, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Legend said, don't underestimate him. Sorry.
No, and it's hard to know how far to go with that statement. Don't underestimate we were talking about the ocean earlier. They say when you're on the beach, never turn your back. If you're in the water, don't turn your back on the ocean, because you never know when some funky wave's going to come up. And if you're not watching, you're just going to get rolled.
Right.
But you don't expect all of a sudden the ocean to like grab you and fling you up the beach 50 feet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
And so
you put it that way.
There's certain limitations, and they've seen him keep expanding, and Arms Master, says, hey, I've watched the tape. I've run it through simulations. I know all you can do.
Yeah.
But this was the point I was trying to make earlier about the cunning, because it seems like Leviathan is definitely drawing Arms Master in at this point. And it seems like there's an inhuman intelligence there that's way beyond what was suspected. And, maybe even has other powers or something, almost similar to Tattletale, somehow able to sense the strategy that's being used against it or what's arrayed against it. And
really?
I don't know. It's hard to, when you continually underestimate something, then you get to the point where you're like, well, all right, well, maybe I'll overestimate it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll think, it's able to be in my thoughts or whatever, or it's projecting things into my thought. It's because it just time and again, it surprises the capes, and they just seem like they can't get ahead of it. They get ahead for a little bit and then they get slapped down again.
It would be a glorious battle to see on the big screen, right up to the time where Arms Master gets grabbed and his quest for glory falls completely apart. So Leviathan uses the storm sewers and overcomes Arms Master's strategy and defeats him and drops him in one spot and his arm in the other, and then heads off down the street. Skitter, immediately seeing the difficulty that Arms Master is in, sends her swarm clones toward Leviathan to try to get them on him to do anything. And then after Leviathan drops Arms Master and she goes to try to assist him, he made the comment that he thought she was dead. Oh yeah, and we went past the part that her armband had stopped working at one point prior to Leviathan arriving on her street.
Good catch. Yeah, I hadn't considered that, but that is kind of a common thing from other stories where people have different sensors on their body or whatever, or in their spacesuit, and people think they're dead because they're not sensing any life signs anymore, but it's just that the sensors are dead. So that's an understandable reaction. But yeah, Arms Master, his left arm was gone at the shoulder, torn out of the socket, blood from the wound. You're dead. It's like, oh, well, yeah, you're pretty close. I'm not as dead as you.
Yeah. Oh gosh, just a sad defeat for this guy. I mean, definitely. His ego brought him here, but what can you say? So as Skitter runs over to help him and is trying to staunch the bleeding as best she can with her one good hand, the insects the swarm that she has on Leviathan, she can sense it, the direction it's moving, and she's like, hey, I can kind of track him. And she announces that to the armband and says, hey, I can feel which way he's moving. One other thing that we needed to comment on is in this time of battle, Skitter notices that her range and control over insects again has improved, and her range is like almost double, I believe it was, she said.
That sounds right. Yeah. That is surprising, but it's been kind of a pattern. And I guess I think of it like physical fitness. The more you use something, the stronger it gets, or the better you get at using it. So it's somewhat understandable that it's continuing to improve. She's only 15 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's anything like physical maturity, then she's got maybe even a few years to continue to get more powerful.
All right, let's see where that goes. She calls for help using the Arms Master's armband, and Lady Photon and her daughter Laser Dream show up. And after a quick discussion, Lady Photon decided that she would take Arms Master back for medical attention, and that Laser Dream would ferry Skitter in an effort to keep in contact with him via Leviathan via her bugs. And so that's how those two ended up teaming up. And we got to remember that Laser Dream is Glory Girl's cousin. So, she's not going to have any real warm feelings for Skitter going into this. But they work together to do what needs to be done.
Yeah, just to jump back a second, I really like the way Wildbow kind of painted the picture, if you will, of, here you've got these kind of A-list people all decked out in their nice costumes and all that kind of thing. But the main thing that's evident about them is that they've seen half of their family brutally and senselessly torn apart in about an hour.
Right.
So it's when tragedy strikes at this scale, it doesn't discriminate. The people who normally seem to have that Teflon coating and nothing seems to bother them. Even they're getting hit with the worst things that can happen. So I thought it was interesting the way Wildbow took a little moment to paint that picture.
Right. And that was a good microcosm for the overall loss of life. Time and time again during this, Wildbow brings us back to the human cost, the human factor. Yes, these are capes, but they're people, and not all of them have invulnerable traits, and a lot of them die. It rarely do you see that you don't get it in this is not meant to be critical of these movies, but you don't get to see that in like the Marvels and your DC on screen kind of things. Rarely do the heroes die, and here it's an escalation of the violence, and there's a lot of loss of life. I know I keep coming back to that, but that's just where the story takes us.
Yeah, I don't think it can be overemphasized. Even if people are triggering right and left, you wonder how they're going to recover from this. I mean, because of the preparation time they had a huge concentration of capes and parahumans there to try to fight this off, and they're still getting Leviathans mopping up the floor with them. So you wonder what kind of remnant is going to be left.
So Laser Dream and Skitter are chasing Leviathan, relying on Skitter's insects. The heroes are speculating that he's moving toward a shelter where civilians are. And so they follow Leviathan toward this location, toward downtown. Skitter's worried that her father might be there, and oh, wait a minute. I may be jumping ahead.
Well, they head toward the mall.
Right.
And it's the mall she's been to. And then he turns and heads towards downtown.
Right.
The mall is closest mall to her house. So she's thinking about where her dad might have gone and that kind of thing. But then he does head more toward downtown and seems to be headed for one of these shelters.
Right. And we get a brief look at Parian using several of her gigantic stuffed creatures doing battle with Leviathan. She's there. Shadowstalker is there, and Flechette is there. Flechette is using a large crossbow with these needle-like projections, and they seem to be having some genuine effect.
I think, yeah, as bad as Arms Master fumbled his opportunity, he has taken a big chunk out of Leviathan. And so it seems, I don't know if that's playing into how effective the other folks are, but Hook Wolf gets in some good shots, as you said. Flechette is doing okay. And yeah, these weird stuffed animals are even having some positive effect. But then in the midst of it, when you think things are getting better, all of a sudden another cape gets killed. So it's not all rosy.
No. And again, it's one of those situations. Oh, Gru happens to be there. He throws some darkness over Leviathan. Anything to help at this point, anything that can help slow this guy down. He briefly blinds Leviathan long enough for the ranged attackers, some of the people who fire lasers, and I think Ballistic was there. Leviathan's blinded, and they get some shots in just long enough to stagger him a little bit. And that's where he makes his big play and collapses the surrounding areas down into the aquifer, creating a brand new lake in the middle of downtown.
Yeah, legend had warned that that's part of what made Brockton Bay a soft target, and
right.
Leviathan seems to realize he's getting whittled down pretty good, and he goes for his ace in the hole, pun intended.
Yeah, and so the area above the aquifer, he's collapsing down into this subterranean lake, as it were. Laser Dream rescues Skitter, keeps her from drowning, and they head over to that's where they head over to a shelter that's been damaged by the collapse of the surrounding ground. They go there to assist a couple of other capes, and after they get into it sounds like a pretty well set up evacuation shelter. And as they're in there beginning to try to evacuate the people from out of the damaged shelter, she sees Mr. Gladly there and has some thoughts about him.
Yeah, that was quite a twist that Wildbow threw in there. I mean, it's not that big a town, but it's a big enough town that you would think that she wouldn't recognize anybody. But here's this guy, and being a typical teenager, it's like, oh, wait, what's this going on?
Yeah.
She gets a little distracted, and then she remembers she's carrying this halberd, and the capes are not excited about it, but then they try it out, and they're like, oh, yeah, this is working great.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's when they use the halberd to cut their way into the damaged area so that they could evacuate the civilians who were trapped in there right before Leviathan shows up. And then she sees Mr. Gladly.
Right.
Leviathan then shows up, takes out the two capes who were initially there, knocks down Laser Dream. And for a moment, we get a kind of a dark, I don't know, man. I don't know if dark is the way, but very uncomfortable thought process that Skitter has, where she gets ready to run. I don't blame her necessarily for running, but she uses Mr. Gladly turning his back on her as a possible excuse for, well, I'm going to turn my back on you and leave you. It's fitting kind of thing. And I didn't like that necessarily.
Yeah, it's tough. I try to put myself in that position when you were a teenager and you're pretty sure your parents didn't know much, but you still thought maybe your coach was pretty cool, or you had teachers that were you were really close to and you really looked up to. And when one of them proved to be human too, it could be pretty devastating. It could make you question a lot of things because you're looking for somebody to emulate. And so, yeah, Mr. Gladly had this, hey, I'm the cool teacher guy, I'll be your friend. And then she needs a friend and he's just a toad. And so I kind of get it, but yeah, it is a little dark, but as usual, Skitter makes the good choice. She's like, well, you know what? It doesn't matter how other people are acting. I got to do the best I can.
I think a part of me is torn because I go all the way back to that arc, and he offered to help. Now, granted, he was a punk when she was out in the hallway and he was leaving the classroom and he turned his back on her, and the girls continued to harass her. But inside his classroom, he did offer to help, and she turned it down. So I'm not going to completely absolve Taylor for this. And I think that it could be Wildbow's intent to have me have this, as a reader, have this conflict as I juxtapose that scenario as to where we are here. Am I overthinking that?
No, I would say so. I think that could definitely be it. I guess you've done a lot of coaching, you've done a lot of interactions with people Taylor's age, and you've, I'm sure, been a lot around tons of assistants and other people. So I think you've got a much better perspective on this than I do. But I think of it more from the aspect of trying to be a teenager. And I think I was definitely a one strike and you're out kind of kid, where I thought, I tended to put people on a pedestal, and, if they slipped off of that at all, that it was like, forget it, you're done. I'm done with you.
Right.
So I just kind of get that feeling from Taylor.
Okay. Good point. I do see things through that lens since I was 30 years doing that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So good point, buddy. So Skitter girds her loins. She grabs this halberd, and she goes back into the shelter where Leviathan is slaughtering civilians. And she does note that, sadly, the armband doesn't list the names of civilians as they're dying. But to her credit, broken arm and all, she grabs the halberd, goes back in there, and slices him right around his rump, and that hampers his mobility. She gets dropped by his water echo. Fortunately for her, the spacing is such that it doesn't hit her completely full force. So she's able to climb she's pushed out of the shelter, the confined space of the shelter. Leviathan climbs his way out of it, and she's up on top of the street, gets hit by a wave, and gets her back broken. That was a very tense scene. She's face down in the water. The water is just deep enough to where she can't use her hands to turn herself over. And then from out of nowhere, Bitch comes and grabs her and halts. Just as she's about to drown, Bitch grabs and rescues her. And I swear to you, if I was in a movie theater when that happened, I probably would have come out of my seat with a cheer.
I hadn't thought of that, but I can picture you doing that. That was one of those scenes where you're like, get up, come on, you got to get up. Somebody's got to see this. Something's got to come. This can't be it. I would like to touch on the fact that in spite of the broken arm and all the other stuff flying around and the Mr. Gladly thoughts, Skitter still thinks to do the decoys with the bugs and keeps Leviathan from just giving her a claw and taking her out forever. So I thought that was pretty amazing that she keeps her wits about her in spite of everything else.
Thank you. I'm so glad you brought that up. She is multitasking on an incredible level. If you think about it, she's got 3 or 4 swarms of hundreds of thousands of insects. And think about the mental energy that she's not expending, that she is just willing to happen. No more than me reaching on my desk and picking up this pencil while I'm turning over here to turn up the volume on my microphone, kind of thing. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yeah. It's once she gets these tactics down, they almost become second nature. And as her power grows, she continues to add to her repertoire. We talked about her sparring in the loft and how, she seemed to keep learning things and trying new things and seeing where they didn't work, seeing what they did work. And similar to your, martial arts training back in the day, the instructor's goal is usually to get to the point where stuff you do it without thinking. It's just baked
Muscle
in.
memory.
Muscle memory, exactly. And it seems like she's getting that with her skills. She's setting up the decoys. She's putting in the tracking bugs. She's planning out how to get out, what to do if stuff happens, and how to account for her injuries. And she's one of the ones that's doing the best at not underestimating Leviathan.
Yeah.
So pretty amazing for a 15-year-old.
Right. To jump back to the previous chapter, right before Leviathan attacked her and she was under that carport, when she was mapping out the best way to deal with this, her thought process is she needed to think like prey, like a small mouse.
Right.
How she wasn't going to hurt Leviathan, but how could I be effective prey? I believe that's the exact wording on that. That really set the imagery up for me. But in this moment, Bitch rescues her, and she has a pack of 6 or 7 dogs trying to go toe to toe with Leviathan, and Bitch is raging in a way that Skitter has never seen before. And these dogs are being heroic and trying to, in their monstrous form, battle with Leviathan, but Leviathan is just too much for them, and one after another they're being destroyed.
That's a heart-wrenching scene. You can really imagine Bitch was probably doing this against her better judgment. She knew that her dogs didn't have much of a chance, but she's got to do something. And she's just shrieking out to the dogs, kill, trying to encourage them. And as you said, it's just not enough. Leviathan is too strong.
And then, just as all hope seems lost, Zion drops from the sky and begins to finally be the one hero who can really put the hurt down on Leviathan. Or talk about just in time, huh?
No doubt. They had mentioned him earlier on, and that he was hard to count on because he wasn't omniscient. He didn't know, he couldn't just leave a burning building in Kuala Lumpur and then zoom over to Brockton Bay. He had to finish what he was doing. But here he is when they need him at the most. And luckily he's getting the job done.
Yeah, between him and with a bit of an assist from Eidolon, they end up getting Leviathan on the run, injuring him, damaging him, pushing him around, and Leviathan begins to try to make a break for it. A teleporter, as the battle moves further away from Bitch and Skitter, a teleporter pops in and assists Bitch with Skitter, takes Skitter and Laser Dream and teleports them to a field hospital. And it's as chaotic as you would expect a triage center in the middle of a battle to be. Lots of screams of pain and doctors and nurses running around. And Skitter gets attended to, put on a cot, and shackled. Rather inauspicious ending to her battle, helping with dealing with the Endbringer.
I gotta say, that is just totally messed up. Sure, the Protectorate's job is to stop villains, but it was an all hands on deck. Let's try to save humanity, save the city.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the reward for that is that you get locked to a bed with your back broken.
And she begs the guy. He changed one arm, and then she's like, "My other arm's broken. Please don't do that. Please don't move it." And he does anyway, and she screams.
Right.
That sucked.
Yeah. That was just, it's just, again, jarring. It's kind of like, oh, well, there'll be a cleanup effort. There might still be some teamwork going on. Then there'll be some detente after people heal, and then things will go back to normal. But it's like, nope, you're a villain. Doesn't matter if, a giant wave is about to come down this hole and drown us all. I'm going to lock you to this table.
Yeah.
So, but I would like to skip back to one last thing with Scion and Eidolon, where Skitter describes looking at Eidolon, and his expression was so hard to read. I knew now what people meant when they said they thought his face was a mask, a facade. There was nothing I could point to explain why I felt the way I did, but that I sensed disgust from him, like nobility looking at a dog turd.
Yeah.
To paraphrase.
Yeah.
That's wow. I don't know. That was quite a shock to me, and I'm really interested to see where that goes. But overall, I was bummed at the way this chapter ended, with that locking up and mistreatment after all the heroism that she displayed.
Yeah. Nothing I can really add to that. This is why I suggested we end part 1 at this location, because it was a natural break in the story. And we know what Skitter has done and how she helped out. The PRT guy and the nurse, they have no idea, but we can be angry for Skitter as far as that goes. But to be continued, buddy, to be continued. So hold on to that anger, and put it all together when we do part 2 of this episode, and we give your overall impressions.
Sounds good.
And as I was saying, folks, this brings us to the end of part 1. We'll be covering the remaining chapters in the next episode. And at that point, as I said, Andy will share his overall impressions and give us his choice for key character of the arc. And boy, that's going to be an unenviable task for you, my friend.
Well, the ranks have been thinned quite a bit, so that should make it a little easier.
Yeah, I guess so. You put it that way. So for now, folks, that's it for me. That's it for us. Thank you so very much for joining us. We hope to catch you in part 2. Please remember to leave us a comment. Please share with your friends. It'll help us with the YouTube algorithm. And we really want to say thanks for being here. And until part 2, take care.
And if you get a chance, light a candle for all those who are added to the wall of heroes, commemorating the fallen in this battle. This was epic. And from what Keith tells me, because I have kept to our agreement and not read ahead, this is just going to keep escalating. So it's an exciting ride, and we're glad you're here. We're having a lot of fun. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us in this podcast. We hope you'll like, comment, and subscribe. If not, thanks for stopping by anyway, and we'll hope you'll return. Music is by the band YYNOT from their self-titled debut CD. You can find more in the link down below. Catch you later.